I'm Annie Garrett with Happy Idaho podcast series. And today we have Paul Frantulisi of Blue Toad Botanicals on with us today. We are going to be talking about the Christmas tree mushroom and all of the fun stuff enticed in all of that. So here we go. Welcome, Paul.
Hi, thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here today.
Oh, it's always an honor, Paul. I'm so excited to talk about the Amanita mushroom today and just
Fine.
learn so much from you. It's always so much fun talking with you. So I am excited to chit chat and to learn with you. So if you could just start out by giving us an overview of who you are and what is Blue Toad Botanicals.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. So, our current business, Blue Toad Botanicals, it's a functional mushroom business focused on creating botanical stacks that help people heal, help people get to what we call homeostasis, balance, and real proud of what we're doing. The focus of the business is mushrooms. And we're going to talk a little bit about Amanita today, Amanita muscaria, Amanita pantherina. And those are two of our favorite mushrooms that are sort of coming onto the scene very quickly now. So, yeah, happy to be here. Love to talk about mushrooms. So, thank you so much.
Oh, awesome. A serial entrepreneur. Love to hear that. I know
Yes.
you're always innovating and adding new products to your site. And so, do you want to just tell us a little bit about the Amanita products that you do have before we get into the history of the Amanita muscaria mushroom?
Sure, sure. So we just launched, oh, probably a month or so ago, two Amanita products. They're tinctures, and we decided to go with the tincture format for a whole host of reasons. Mainly because a lot of people that are used to taking these types of functional mushrooms, and we'll get into that during the talk, are generally used to taking them in a tincture format. It's kind of historically what's been done for literally hundreds of years. Um, so these two tinctures, we focused on two things. One is calming, anxiety, anti-anxiety, and calming, and the other one is sleep. And post-pandemic, that's two of the biggest issues that a lot of people are having these days. They're anxious, they're worried, they're concerned, paying bills, things like that. And then sleep is a consequence of that, having a hard time sleeping. So we extracted amanita, and again, we'll talk about that a little bit later. And we added to it colloidal gold, 24 karat gold, and L-theanine. And in the sleep formula, we add 3 milligrams of melatonin. The tinctures are amazing. They work amazingly well. They're tasty, so people are comfortable taking them. And one of the key things I think is that we don't use a lot of alcohol. So we only have about 2% alcohol, so the tinctures don't taste like you're drinking alcohol.
That I wanna talk about the alcohol content. That is amazing because I take so many tinctures myself,
Yep.
and I always have to choke them down or chase them down
Yeah.
with, a pineapple juice or a really strong flavored fruit juice because they have such a strong alcohol content.
Yep.
And I have been taking your Amanita sleep tincture, and I love it. I think it's
Oh,
amazing.
wonderful.
The flavor's great, and the effects have just been really cool. So I just really appreciate you for turning us on to that. And I'm so excited for you to walk us through the history of the Amanita mushroom and the significance that it had in different and ancient cultures.
Sure. So, gosh, Amanita's thousands of years of history, which is amazing, and that's the cool part. So, we often, as a culture, we think of sort of history in terms of our history, 100, 200 years in American history, but Amanita's been around like all mushrooms for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. So, Amanita's got this long history of being used in various cultures. It's Amanita as a whole is a diverse group of mushrooms or fungi that have this complex history. We sort of know it today by its iconic appearance, which is either a yellow or bright red cap with white spots on it. And most people think of that, you mentioned this early, Annie, as sort of the Christmas mushroom. But prior to that, amanitas, have held a really significant place in human history, scientifically from a folklore perspective. And again, as I said, it's been in use for thousands of years. So a lot of ancient cultures and societies associated amanita or used amanita in religious or spiritual ceremonies or practices, mainly because they found that these mushrooms had some sort of psychoactive effect. So there are psychoactive compounds, and we'll get into that again. But they're called muscimol and ibotenic acid. Those are the two key ones that we know about. And those compounds tend to create hallucinations, altered states, different states of consciousness, vivid dreaming. So there's lots of things that happen when you use these mushrooms. So
Yeah.
often shamans and priests used amanita in different rituals and ceremonies to, in their minds, communicate with the spiritual world. So researchers found that amanita was commonly played a role in these types of rituals because it gave these shamans the feeling or the appearance of having some different connection with the spiritual world, and therefore gave them sense of healing, but also a sense of power. Um, One key point I think with understanding the history of amanita is that it's a really risky mushroom to work with. It contains amatoxins, and that's one of the components that I talked about a little earlier that can lead to poisoning, hospitalization, or death. So there's some risk with using amanita, and that risk is again historically noted in lots of text. And there's also a mushroom in the amanita field called amanita phalloid, which is it's known as death cap mushroom. It's an extremely poisonous mushroom that can cause very quickly death. So a lot of people throughout history have accidentally ingested amanita and died or gotten very sick from it. So amanita's got this weird sort of history about it from the historical points that I just mentioned earlier, but also over the past couple hundred years that people have foraged amanita, eaten it, and gotten very sick or died because of eating high levels of that ibotenic acid that I mentioned. So it's a really diverse mushroom that's got this long, long history that's both dangerous on one hand and psychedelic and amazing on the other hand.
Yeah, that's so interesting that all of that is wrapped up in one mushroom. It's wild to me. So you talked about the Siberian shamanism. Um, we also want to touch on, the ceremonies they did. So I have in my notes here a ritualistic drink called soma. Was that tied in with the Siberian shamanism rituals, or was that a different demographic?
No, it has been. Soma is generally associated with Vedic text in Hinduism, so that's where
Okay.
Soma really comes from. But again, there are a lot of different cultures that use these mushrooms and made concoctions, if you will, or drinks from them. There's Soma is considered sort of a sacred or mystical drink that causes these religious or spiritual experiences, psychedelic experiences. So it's mainly focused on ancient India through these Vedic texts that I mentioned. But the thing with Soma is that there's really no direct linkage between the drink itself, other botanicals which were used, of course, in India at the time, and still is used in India at the time, and still are used. And Amanita. So there's some assumptions that are made in terms of attributing Soma to Amanita or Amanita to Soma based on some of the descriptions that bear a resemblance or an appearance of Amanita mushrooms based on where they're finding these plants or fungi in the high mountains, what they might look like. So they didn't call them Amanita, of course, at the time, but the assumptions are that this Soma drink was partly included amanita mushrooms or one of the amanita mushrooms.
Okay. So, if somebody was to drink soma, what can they expect? Is it different for everybody, similar to, how an ayahuasca trip can be? Or is
Mm.
it pretty standard?
Yeah, so it's different for everybody. Like any psychedelic, expectations can be varied, and everybody goes into a psychedelic experience, whether it's with an amanita mushroom, which and I should talk a little bit about the psychedelic differences between sort of an LSD and a psilocybin and an amanita. They're very, very different experiences. But getting back to the initial question, The expectations are very different for everybody, and there's a lot of misconceptions about the properties of amanita compared to or versus LSD or a psilocybin experience. So generally, um, amanita mushrooms will calm you. They connect with their agonist to GABA receptors, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. But they generally calm you down. They slow things down. They slow down connections between nerve endings, and you get this sort of perceptual distortion and slightly psychedelic experience. Very, very different from a psilocybin or an LSD experience, let's say, where you're having highly mystical experiences where you might be actually connecting with other beings or going to different places or seeing color shifts and just really strong psychedelic experiences. Generally not the case with amanita. Tends to be much more subtle. I think where you find some really interesting experiences in amanita, at least with me, and I've heard experiences from other people, is very vivid dreaming, really strong dreams. Um, so in those dreams, you could have perceptual distortions of people that you know, experiences that you've had, altered colors, things like that, but it generally comes in sort of a dream state. Um, Sometimes there's a space and time perception shift, so things can feel a little bit distorted. Again, that's happened with me a couple times. To put it perceptually, you just feel like things are just shifting a little bit. Nothing terrible, nothing scary, of course. Um, Also, a small sense of euphoria, extreme relaxation can come about, and with some people, nausea, discomfort. And I still experience a little bit of nausea and discomfort when I do large amounts of amanita, even though we're converting or removing a lot of the abitanic acid and converting it to muscimol, which is the more psychedelic piece as opposed to the poisonous molecule. So those are the sort of common things. And again, I always suggest everybody approach amanita with caution, do your research, know what you're doing as much as possible. I suggest never eating a raw foraged amanita mushroom. It could be very, very dangerous.
Absolutely. Don't go foraging for wild mushrooms unless you know what you're doing or you have Paul with you. He's a professional.
Yeah, absolutely. And listen, in amanitas, it's like 600 different uh, species of amanita. So it's it's easy to notice an amanita mushroom, but it's also very hard to distinguish between the different species, and they could be very, very different in terms of what the outcome will be, how much ibotenic acid versus how much muscimol. And so you want to be very, very careful. I also suggest there's some great apps on your iPhone that you can get to identify various species of mushrooms. So that's always helpful. But with amanita, one of the keys, Annie, is always you want to boil it. You want to break down that ibotenic acid and convert it to muscimol. And on our website, we have some tools on how to do that. And then, of course, you can Google it as well. But you want to do that before you eat it, always.
Got it. You cut out there just a little bit on the end,
Oh, sorry.
on my end. You're all good. So, since we're talking so much about the botanic acid and the muscimol,
Mhm.
let's talk about the differences and what you guys have developed with your Blue Toad botanical tinctures and why your tincture is developed the way that it is.
Sure. So we do a couple of things when we get our mushrooms. So we start with two different varieties of Amanita mushrooms. We use Amanita muscaria and Amanita pantherina. I'll try to say that fast a couple times.
Pantelina. Am I
So
saying that right?
yeah, you're saying it right. Yeah. So those are the two key mushrooms that we use. They have pantherina has the highest levels of muscimol. It's about three times the amount in that you'd find in anthermina. I'm sorry, amanita, typical amanita mushroom. So again, out of the 600 different varieties, those are the two key ones that have the highest levels of muscimol, but they also have high levels of ibotenic acid. So we've got to deal with that somehow. The way to deal with that is through different extraction procedures, and there's ways to do it. You can cook the mushrooms and boil them, of course, heat them basically. and the heating breaks down the molecules and on the ibotenic acid, and it converts it through heat into muscimol, which is again the good molecule that we want. You can do it through using sonication, what's called a sonicator, and that's breaking down the mushroom with sound and then cooking it. When you break it down with sound, what happens is you open up the mushroom itself, the cell walls of the mushroom, and you let all those molecules out, all the good stuff out, and then you get to
Wow.
convert it into muscimol. So we
You break it down with sound?
yes, you would put the mushroom basically grind the mushroom down into a small pieces or powder, put it into water, and then what's called a sonicator, which is a sound bar that just goes in your jar, in your container, will hit certain frequencies that'll open up the cell walls of the mushroom and break them down, open them up, and then allow the right components to come out. Basically, the muscimol is what we want, and the ibotenic acid. Then through heat process, we break down the ibotenic acid and convert it into muscimol. What you end up with in our case, in our tincture, is you have high levels of muscimol, zero ibotenic acid, so very little effect on getting sick or having gut issues.
Yeah, which is really it's hard to avoid that sickness when you are taking psychedelics. So I love that you guys have really engineered this to be not only safe, but also comfortable for
Yeah,
people.
absolutely.
So I can attest to
Go ahead.
the the euphoric feeling when you
Yeah.
are taking Amanita.
Mhm.
And when I took the tincture for the first time, I took it and then I went to bed and I was laying in bed and I'm like, "Okay, I'm waiting for this thing to hit me."
Waiting and
And
waiting.
yeah, this body high came and it was just like I was light and it was euphoric and it started like from my head and just went all the way down to my feet and I just felt like I was almost floating. And
Nice.
I
Love
can't
that.
remember what my dreams were, but I just want like, I just, just want to bow to the safety and the feeling, right, that you get from these tinctures to anybody who is curious about experimenting with Amanita. Um, you know, Paul's stuff is totally safe.
Thank you, thank you.
Do
So,
you norm Go ahead.
oh, I was gonna say, quick thing on the body high. I love what you just described. It reminds me of an experience that I had a long, long time ago, probably 30 years ago, that I didn't understand at the time. But now that I'm in this business, in this industry, I've come to understand what happened. I had an outer body experience. I was laying in bed, like you were describing, and I'm laying next to, at the time, my girlfriend, and suddenly I felt this tug on my body, and I literally pulled out of my body. I went to the ceiling, and I suddenly had this visual representation. I was looking at us from the ceiling down on the bed, and it lasted about 20 minutes. My girlfriend was experiencing it with me, meaning we were communicating as it was happening. And I get just chills talking about it right now. It was such an amazing experience. And I had no idea what was happening. I wasn't doing drugs. I wasn't doing mushrooms. I was doing nothing, just laying there. What I found out later on, again, similar to the experience you just described, is that our body actually produces DMT. So our bodies have the ability to produce DMT, which is the most powerful psychoactive substance known to man. And for some reason, because of the state that I was in, my body produced a little bit of DMT, and I had that outer body experience. So our bodies are these amazing scientific laboratories that can produce these amazing chemicals, right? And we produce an endocannabinoid similar to THC. We produce DMT. So we produce obviously serotonin and dopamine. So these are things that our body naturally produce. And a mushroom like amanita can actually assist our body by acting as an agonist to the GABA receptor to calm us down and then allow some of these other amazing things to happen.
That's amazing. I've never heard of like a tandem, what is it? Like a lucid dreaming experience? That's phenomenal.
It
That's
was
really
life
cool.
changing. Yeah, it was very
And
cool.
it's just amazing to me how, how these shamans and these ancient cultures really had things figured out. And here in the 21st century, we have all this great technology, but we're so disconnected from
We
our
are
bodies. We don't understand our bodies. We don't know how, to feed our bodies. And I mean, a lot of people don't even know that their bodies have DMT receptors and they don't know how they can activate those things either. So you
right,
talked about the
right.
GABA connection. So let's talk about that and how amanita and our neurotransmitters interact in our body.
Sure. Yeah. So a lot of people today take GABA, right? It's a standard amino acid that you can buy as a capsule, as a chewable, what have you, in any health food store. And we all think of anyone that's taking GABA thinks of it just helping calm you down. Most people don't understand how it actually works, but so what GABA does is it connects with neurotransmitters. It's an amino acid that is essentially an inhibitory neurotransmitter. So it inhibits your nervous system from functioning. It reduces, for lack of a better term, neural excitability or nerve transmission. So it slows everything down. So if you're very
Mhm.
excitable, you're nervous, you're anxious, you're having this sense of feeling of anxiety, GABA will inhibit those nerve connections and then slow all of that down, which gives you a sense or feeling of calming, right? So GABA is an amazing an amino acid. So it acts as an agonist to these receptors. And for those who don't know what an agonist is, it's essentially it's a substance that mimics actions of a typical neurotransmitter. So um, the connection between amanita as acting as an agonist to GABA neurotransmitters is amazing because it acts as an automatic calming agent, slowing everything down naturally, just like GABA would if you were to take GABA. So the end result can be just calming, um, inducing sleep, vivid dreaming, just this calm, beautiful feeling. So it's an amazing connection between your GABA neurotransmitters and amanita mushrooms, specifically muscimol, as we've talked about.
Yeah, yeah, that's amazing. And so, circling back to the beginning when you were talking about why you developed this product, right? Post
Sure,
pandemic, people are under a lot of stress.
absolutely.
And, you guys offer a really incredible line of products, outside of just your Amanita tincture.
Yeah,
But, the tincture alone is so incredible, not only for your health, but it's it's way more affordable, I think, than going to a doctor and getting on, something synthetic that your body isn't going to recognize as easily. Your body's gonna, spend a little bit more time flushing it out versus, taking an organic substance like your Amanita tincture. You really are doing yourself a favor, beyond just calming yourself down. You're giving your
absolutely.
body some organic substances, and it's like, oh my
Yeah,
gosh, I recognize this. I know what's happening. I know what to do.
absolutely. I love that you just said that. This is one of these passions that I have where when we talk about big pharma, typical Western medicine, again, which I love for important things like broken bones and all that sort of stuff.
Absolutely.
But when you talk about eating a mushroom or cannabis or hemp or we could go on and on about different botanicals, and the fact that we have these receptors in our body to connect with cannabinoids are a great example. We have an endocannabinoid system in our body that connects with cannabinoids that are plant-based. We also produce our own, as I talked about a minute ago, but we have these phytocannabinoids that are in plants that our bodies connect to help do things in our body, create homeostasis, balance our immune system, all these amazing things. Yet, most of these components are illegal. These plants are
Mhm.
fungi, and our bodies have these receptors for them. So we're sort of working against ourselves in so many ways, and we're depending on medicine to sort of make drugs synthetically that try to connect with these neurotransmitters or these receptors. But we have plants and fungi that automatically do it, that we've grown up with over millions of years, developing the connection between the plants, the fungi, and our systems, our internal systems. So yeah, I think as you said, it's you have to be careful with anything, right? Anything is poisonous, right? You can drink
Mhm.
yourself to death with water if you wanted to, right? So you've
Yeah.
got to be careful. I'm a huge fan of microdosing in small doses to get the effect. and being really smart and careful about it. But using medicine like fungi and like different botanicals to heal is, for me, the absolute way to go. Um, Always speak to your doctor. Always ask your professional, of course.
Disclaimers.
Yes,
We've
gotta say
always
it.
gotta put that out there,
Gotta say
and
it.
I think it's so silly, in Western society. I mean, America is a baby compared to all of these other ancient
Yes.
civilizations out there. And these ancient civilizations survived for generations with, living off the land and figuring out nature and working with nature and learning all about that. And so, if someone was curious about experimenting with mushrooms and wanted to learn more about Amanita, what direction would you push them in? Are there any books, any articles, any writers, that
Sure.
you've learned from?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of information out in Amanita and a lot of bad information, like anything I would say, right? So
Mhm.
there's a lot of misinformation out there about Amanita because of the worry of the ibotenic acid side and the getting sick and the potentially dying side. It's incredibly rare that somebody would die with an Amanita muscaria or pantherinatum. If ever, you'll get maybe a bad tummy or something like that. Worst case. But yes, there's information on our website, bluetoadbotanicals.com. We've got a couple guides out there for microdosing and amanita and things like that, starter guides. There are definitely a couple, amanita mushrooms.com. There's a few other websites out there where you can get some research. There's some new research coming out from NIH and other institutions that are doing some, I think, really good work on understanding muscimol as a molecule and trying to figure out what we can do with it and how we can use it. My concern there is that a lot of those institutions are then turning that into a pharma drug and charging you $10,000 to take it. But I think we can learn from it, right? If we read those papers, we can learn a lot from those papers and take some information out of them and then apply that to the mushroom itself and the experience itself. But always be
Yeah.
careful. That's key, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would hate to see big pharma do to Amanita what they've done to the poppy,
Oh boy.
in that big crisis. I know that's, a huge eye opener right now for a lot of people just because there's the painkiller documentary on Netflix right now all about the opioid crisis.
Hmm.
And so it's hyped up right now because people, are seeing it on Netflix and they're being awake. But this has been a problem for a very long time where these big pharma drugs are so synthetic that they're wreaking havoc on our human bodies. So I am I'm in a new home. I'm on a property I'm up in the mountains, and I
Yeah,
myself have been learning so much about foraging, and harvesting, what's naturally growing on my land to be able to be self-sufficient and, build
yeah,
my apothecary. And it's amazing what the earth has out there, like we've read in our Bibles, and it's very common knowledge, like God has provided, right? And whether you want to name your higher power God or, your source energy or, whatever makes sense for you, there's so much to be uncovered, no pun intended, on the Amanita mushroom alone, and then in addition to all of the other plant medicine, that these civilizations in history have been using forever. And so this is such a fun conversation to start, our conversation on down the road of psychedelics and mushrooms. And I'm so excited for people to hear it and start exploring and learning on their own. So, if someone was new
mhm.
to mushrooms or tinctures, psychedelics, microdosing, what would be like a good entry for them? Is the Amanita a good, entry level microdose for someone who's never microdosed before?
I think so. Yeah, I like that idea. I think it is. We built it that way, and to be clear, just in terms of my own view or vision of these medicines, I'm a huge fan of microdosing. I'm also a fan of macro. Right? There's nothing
Yeah.
wrong with taking a macro trip, whatever that may be. on whatever medicine you're using. But I think on a daily basis, I think the world would be a much different place if we all focused on microdosing. And the reason being that there's amazing science coming out right now on the benefits of taking very small amounts of different molecules. And it could be mushrooms, amanita, psychedelics, but also things like just L-theanine and GABA and all the other botanicals and amino acids that we talked about. At a microdose level, they have a massive effect on your body without a noticeable sort of shift in perception. So you can go to work and take your amanita and not worry about getting kind of high or worrying about losing control or what have you or anyone noticing you. So I'm a huge fan of microdosing for those reasons because you get the massive benefit on a human level, on a psychological and emotional level, but you don't have to have the high, if you will, for lack of a better term. And to answer your question, I guess directly in terms of where to find information and things like that, I'm a huge fan of just not listening to any one person or one thing or one document. Do your research, dig in deep, and trust your intuition, trust your gut in many ways, and just go slow. Always go slow. That's the best way to handle it.
Yeah, absolutely. Start with less and you can always add more. I love that you say trust your intuition because that is a whole nother skill that I feel like also is not used and trusted as much as it should be. There are so many times where your gut is telling you, okay, don't do that. And then you do it anyway? And the more that you listen to your gut,
Yeah.
your intuition, right? The stronger that skill is going to be for you, similar to, experimenting with mushrooms. The more that you do it, the more comfortable you're going to get, the more comfortable your body's going to get. For me, when I use psychedelics, I've tried taking them so many different ways, and the last one, I made a tincture with some psychedelics, and they were teacher mushrooms, and I still had an upset stomach, and I
Mhm.
take it with orange juice or, ginger juice, and I really try and, like, take it with some acid to help with the digestion.
Right.
So even I, haven't been able, to do it just in my home kitchen. So I'm really impressed that you have been able to really nail that down in your amanita tinctures because I know that can really be scary. It can kind of be a turnoff for people when they're getting into psychedelics. They're like, "Oh my god, what's happening? I feel sick. I should stop
Yeah.
this." Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Where people who know psychedelics, they're like, "Okay, I just got to push past this, right? And my body's having a reaction and I just got to get to the other side."
Absolutely. So one of the key things there, I think, one of the beauties of current science and capabilities technologically is that we now understand what's going on, and we understand that upset stomach is because mushrooms have this incredible thing called a chitin wall, and it's a cell wall that's incredibly difficult to open and to crack open, if you will. It's also very hard for your body to digest, which causes the upset. So when your body has something, when you're putting something in your gut that's hard to digest, your body's fighting it and struggling through it. We now know that the chitin wall is causing that problem. And again, ancient culture, to your point earlier, they figured some of this out earlier as well. And they figured out what to do with acids. And lemon tech is sort of the current thing that people are using right now. It's a technique to
Oh.
break down the chitin or the chitin wall, and you basically put your mushrooms in lemon juice for 20 to 30 minutes. It breaks it down. The acidic nature of the lemon breaks it down, and it makes it easier for stomach to digest. But we're also getting into some really interesting areas where we're learning how to extract the key components of, let's say, psilocybin. I use a Thai golden teacher as well. I love that. And how to extract from that mushroom and take all the key components out and not have to ingest all of that cell wall chitin that causes the upset, so you can get the benefit without all the negative. So again, things are progressing quickly in the industry, and we're seeing a lot of really cool things happening with using technology and ancient wisdom, if you will, to learn how to better extract from the mushroom and better use it to have a better experience overall.
Oh, that is so cool. That's the first time I'm hearing about the China wall. Thank you for that, Paul.
Perfect.
I'm always
Absolutely.
learning from you. So
Yeah.
I have so many of your products at home. I've tried so many of your products. Your chocolate, I think, was the first product you made, right?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So I've taken, you guys have a caffeine chocolate and a chocolate that helps with brain fog.
Mhm.
And these things are fully loaded. They
Good.
will get the caffeine will get you jacked up, and
Yeah.
even me personally, I recently just healed my adrenals, and so I was going through just this really stressful last couple of years where I was working a lot. I was in construction, on a brand new home, fully developing a property. And so there's all of these outside stressors. And I totally just I killed my adrenals. Like I
Been there.
don't want to brag about this, but I was like, I was the person who could drink 4 cups of coffee, at 7 p.m. and then go to bed at 11. And so it's so cool to be learning, from you, Paul, from someone who has so many answers. You're such a resource for me when I'm looking and searching for products that my body will recognize, that my body's going to be able to digest and process, and
Yeah.
also to be able to source products from a friend, source them locally. And
Absolutely. Key.
it's so amazing, and so now that my adrenals are fixed, if ever I need to pick me up, I just break off a piece, just a small piece of that caffeine chocolate, and that will keep me going, but even the brain fog chocolate has gotten me through a lot of just really long afternoons, and what I really like about that chocolate is it has the ginger and the Meyer lemon in there, so it
Oh,
adds a little
amazing.
bit of
I
the
love it.
spice and the sweet. It's such a great treat. So
So, interesting,
go ahead.
you mentioned just healing and, you know, so good for you to heal your adrenals. I've gone through the same thing. My cortisol levels were the highest. The lab that I went to had my blood work done ever recorded in history. And I, like you, I kind of laughed it off. They called me in panic when they saw my cortisol levels, and they wanted me to get to the hospital immediately. And I laughed, and I was like, I'm an entrepreneur. It's like I'm used to being here all the time with stress levels. But
Mhm.
you know what happened? It took its toll on me. Yes. So I did that for 30 straight years, and finally it took its toll, and I had a bit of a crash. Had to rebuild my adrenal function and a lot of things. And like you, I'm going through that process and doing well with it. But what what I would say to everybody and how I got here is I think really interesting is Pam and I had Lyme disease years ago. It's on the website, the whole story. And the doctors weren't doing anything for me. I was 5 years chronic with Lyme, and literally on what we felt was my deathbed. Spinal meningitis, in and out of hospitals. I lost all speech. I had no coordination. I couldn't walk. I couldn't talk. I had no memory. It was bad. And Pam and
Oh,
I punted at one point and just said, forget all the Western medicine crap that I was dealing with for 5 years. Antibiotics, 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 antibiotics. That's all they did. And what we did was we started digging into Ayurvedic medicine, traditional Chinese medicine, botanicals, mushrooms. And we just dug in ourselves and put a protocol together. And 3 months later, I was completely healed, completely healed. And that was sort of our shift. That was
wow.
our moment where we said, this is crazy. We need to be a part of this. And that was 32 years ago, I think. And we've been studying ever since. So I'm no expert. I'm literally I'm an entrepreneur that puts my whole energy toward trying to understand what we're doing and what our ancestors did, and then try and connect the two as best I can, right? In today's culture, anybody can do
Yeah,
it, which is great. The information is out there.
absolutely. I love that you speak to that. You know, there's a big remembering. There's this big remembering wave I feel that's hitting. It's global, right? Where people are waking up. They not only want answers to their problems, that big pharma is going to give them. They want solutions and they want to know themselves. And in doing so, it takes them to know their body. And what better way to do that than to source mushrooms or source from the earth, right? And use these herbal remedies and this food that's been
Yeah,
growing on the earth since forever. So I
absolutely.
think it's so cool that, there's this huge wave, right? Because you said amanitas, it's all the hype right now. All these people, are taking it.
Yeah,
It's
it's
so
cool.
cool. Yeah, it's
But
the
the
cool new
fact is,
thing.
the cool part is if we really are smart about it, we pay attention to what we're doing now, but we look backwards a lot. Because
Yeah.
backwards is where there's thousands of years of evidence of use, of knowledge, of history, and if we don't look backwards, we're gonna make mistakes. So, I love to combine looking backwards, looking at that history, understanding what our forefathers did for hundreds or thousands of years, and maybe one of our next podcasts can be about Yupan tea. That's another forgotten caffeinated tea that grows in North America that nobody knows about. Nobody. It was 8,000 years in use and it went away 200 years ago for no reason.
I would love to talk about that. I know we dabbled a little bit in that last time we talked,
Yeah,
and I was so enticed because, I've heard of yerba mate, but even that, a lot of people just associate with the yellow can in the grocery store. They
right,
don't know, the traditional way of drinking it, and, it's very ceremonial, similar
yes,
to matcha, right? And you can go get matcha at Starbucks now and not even have a ceremony.
right, right.
So I love that you love to bring up, the history. Look back at Antioch. What were they doing? They were doing something right. They knew what was going on.
Absolutely, absolutely, love that. There's so much we could go on for days on this, it's amazing.
Thank you so much, Paul, for all the information. So if people are looking to buy Blue Toad
Mhm.
Botanicals, where can they find you?
BlueToadBotanicals.com, and we've got some great products there, more coming out all the time, and, thank you so much. Great talking with you, Annie, always wonderful seeing you, you're such an inspiration.
Oh, thank you so much, Paul. All right, guys, go check out
Thank
bluetoadbotanicals.com and
you.
we'll see you guys next time.
Cheers. Bye-bye.